Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. We're living in a time of great uncertainty. A lot of political and environmental turmoil, lots of people at each other's throats, many disagreements, and few areas of fact that we can converge upon. But I think there is tremendous reason to be very cheerful and optimistic about the world that is to come. And the reasons for this is that we have these three amazing technologies which are emerging, which are going to reshape how our society functions. Machine intelligence, or artificial intelligence, machine economics, which is how I describe things like blockchain and distributed hash table technologies, and machine ethics, the ability to infuse a little bit of values into machines to start to align them more to our hopes and our wishes for the future. Now, I'm sure many of you on your vacations 10 or 12 years ago took some photographs which are, by today's standards, pretty low resolution. And yet, we can apply things like machine intelligence to recreate information which was never captured in the first place. Very, very sophisticated reconstructions which are eerily accurate. How is this achieved? In life, there are many different correlations, right? Correlations like the side of somebody's face tends to look like the other side. Or people with big hands tend to have big feet also. Very simple, straightforward correlations. But along with those are very deep, mysterious, twisty correlations that we can't easily describe or make sense of. Sometimes we may get a flash of intuition that tells us something, but we can't rationally explain why we have that belief. This kind of misty, twisty correlation is something that machines can help us to understand. Machines can make sense of these tiny, tiny little correlations in dimensions of information far beyond our knowledge, and they can bring that back to us. This is why machines are able to help us to make sense out of chaos and to automate the ineffable, the things that we cannot describe in words or mathematics. This is a game changer. Now, our interactions with machines are increasing all the time. We're becoming very bonded with them. We start to feel naked without our smartphone. And we are influencing how they do things. We're giving them feedback. And they, of course, are influencing us as well. It's actually a two-way process. Machine learning goes both ways. Now, about 50% of traffic on the internet today is not human beings, but in fact is bots. And that ratio of bots to humans is increasing all of the time. They are influencing us in so many different ways. Sometimes for the better, and sometimes not so much for the better. There are programs around the world trying to create certifications for machine intelligence to help us to manage these issues of transparency, bias, and accountability in better ways. And I think that rules like this are incredibly important, but they're only a beginning, because young humans don't tend to learn so much about rules from a rule book. They tend to learn from examples. They tend to learn from Saturday morning cartoons. Now, there's this emerging domain of machine ethics, sometimes also described as value alignment. It's about starting to teach machines our expectations about how social protocols should function, to begin to teach machines about social norms and, how people interact with each other in ways that produce positive outcomes. I have a little project called ethicsnet.org, which is attempting to crowdsource examples of behavioral norms, pro-social or less social. We have a little browser toolbar that you can install, and whenever you come across a piece of text, a photograph, or a video of something that is either pro-social or not pro-social, you can tag it, and you can start to create a corpus of Saturday morning cartoons for machines to learn about us, and to learn about us from our own demographics or where we happen to be in the world. Because it's no good to just have Silicon Valley impose its morals and values on the rest of the world. That isn't really going to work. Machines need to be able to meet us wherever we happen to be ourselves. And it's going to come to us to teach machines, to enable the raise of the machines. I think we need to teach them manners, politeness, and congeniality. Those things which are almost pre-moral, but we start to pick up around the ages of 4 to 6 years of age. We need to create a global data set of all of these different behavioral examples and norms for it to be democratic and participatory. But that's a big challenge in today's world. Many people who perhaps ought to be working together are not. They're figuring out ways to disrupt that process. They're figuring out that they want a zero-sum outcome where somebody wins and somebody loses. I'm creating a list of principles at culturalpeace.org, looking at perhaps a Geneva Conventions, if you will, for the culture wars, helping to create good rules that help to preserve peace and good faith in our society. Because if it erodes much further, it could go in a very bad direction. I happen to grow up in Northern Ireland, and so I know how bad sectarianism can get. Let's take it in another direction, something more positive. Trust is the greatest predictor of happiness and also wealth in a society. Even when you control for other factors like resources or education, trust is really the fundamental factor that tells whether a society is happy or not. We have new ways of building trust, and we need to start using them. Trust enables coordination. And coordination also enables trust, coordination such as good institutions. And trust and coordination are what enable us to create new levels of social complexity, to be able to do more advanced stuff, more division of labor, less checks and security on everything. And when that trust breaks down, societal complexity must drop as well. It must drop down to a scale which is again sustainable. And so our social trust is really what enables the modern world. A lot of this is to be blamed on algorithms, which are optimizing for engagement. And the strongest form of engagement sometimes is outrage. But we also live in a world where machines can help to turn Mandarin into Swahili. And so perhaps machines can help us to translate between our different factions, between our different worldviews, to help us to understand each other. Because sometimes we're speaking the same language, but the words mean different things. And maybe machines can help us get around that. There are other ways of building trust. Technologies built on blockchain, public ledgers, distributed hash tables are enabling us to come together and align and coordinate in new ways which were never possible before. They're helping us to build trust and coordination with shared knowledge or epistemology and aligning incentives in powerful new ways and in methods which are radically decentralized, where there's no single point of failure or where one bad actor can take control of the network easily. This provides so much more resilience against attack. And there are new methods evolving all the time. I'm sure some of you, or maybe your children, play these kinds of hidden object games, right? Where it tells you to look for an object and then you have to click it or draw a little box around it. Maybe some of you can spot a blue egg. A blue egg. There it is. Now, of course, if I wanted to prove to you that I'd found that blue egg, I could show you a picture like that. But then you would know where to find that yourself, and that would not be so much fun. So what if I moved the position and the rotation and the scale of that blue egg? Then you wouldn't know exactly where to find it, but I could still prove that I'd done something. In a loose analogy, this is how a new technology called zero-knowledge proofs function. They enable us to have our cake and eat it too, in terms of having transparency whilst also respecting privacy. And it's technologies like this which are going to enable us to enjoy the benefits of machine intelligence without being terrified about how our data can be exposed to so many different vectors of attack. New technologies are helping us to coordinate, to make decisions, or to make predictions. This is called swarm technology. And all of these people are live in real time, pulling this little puck in one direction. And you can see a little bit of horse trading, where people maybe want to go in one direction and then they're like, okay, that can also work. And this is a radically new way of forming consensuses about very difficult topics or very challenging predictions. So these three elements have incredible power for changing our society. And what's happening now is that we're starting to combine them. We're starting to put these elements together. And we're going to have on-demand assistance for practically any task you can imagine. Safe AI, which is trustworthy, where incentives are aligned in healthy ways, and which is safe, congenial, and pro-social as well. Things like Ocean Protocol or FitChain are enabling people to sell a little bit of data or an AI model or two. And basically, you can go on one of these networks and say, I have a problem, who can help me to solve it? And just like calling an Uber, you can have the premium option or you can have the pool option, which is slower but cheaper. And this is what's changing our ability to harness AI, not in a matter of 6 months, but a matter of 6 minutes, or perhaps even 6 seconds, very soon. This is a big deal. The great philosopher and logician Whitehead reckoned that civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. Right? When we can do stuff without needing to bother about all of the specifics, all of the fiddly bits. The last time we got really good at that was the Industrial Revolution. And it changed everything. And in the time since, we've been gradually expanding the benefits of that to more people around the world and lifting people out of poverty and enabling them to embrace a globalized economy, which I think is a wonderful thing. And we continue this process of getting really, really good at production. Production is becoming more and more lean all the time. But the flip side, consumption and waste, is not. We're lagging. There's a piece of the puzzle which we're still missing. We haven't mastered the art of how to consume in a safe and clean way. Why is that? Part of it is because we tend to think of capital purely in financial terms, right? Money, investment, and so forth. We're not used to thinking about capital or value in terms of natural capital, our environment and the species that live within it, the species that we share our earth with or are supposed to be. We don't think about social capital either. The effects that something will have on creating a more cohesive community or happier people and avoiding suffering. This isn't really on our balance sheet, nor is it typically top of mind. Around the world, governments typically try to do a very important process: the management and accounting of externalities. Externalities are those things where you do something and it affects an unrelated third party. Things like pollution, like noise pollution perhaps. And sometimes these externalities can be positive as well. We can do things ostensibly for ourselves, which also help other people. But typically we think of externalities in negative terms. Now, some externalities are kind of obvious, and they're easy enough to fix. But other externalities may be quite tricky and quite pernicious, and they can only be solved through a large class action lawsuit that lasts 5 or 10 years, and at the end of the day you're left with $3. That's what comes into your account once the lawyers have had their fill. It's not working very well, is it? In many parts of the world, more and more of us live in fantastic luxury that generations before us would just think were unbelievable opulence. And yet, for all of our convenience and joy that we receive, there are costs. But those costs tend to be passed on to others in other parts of the world, very far away. Maybe they're human beings, maybe they're non-human beings, but they all have to suffer. Our modern economy is essentially built on privatized benefits and externalized costs. And until we learn to do this in a better way, we're going to keep making the same mistakes. We need to stop. We need to learn how to understand where costs have been externalized and to control for that in an efficient way. You know, sometimes these things affect people who may not even be born yet, who may not even be born for generations to come. We had a big love affair with lead in previous centuries. We added tetraethyl lead to gasoline, of course, and we put lead in just about any kind of paint you can imagine. And there's a legacy of that, because even though we stopped using it maybe 30 or 40 years ago, that lead is still embedded in the soil. It's still embedded in the streets. And it's still causing urban youth brain damage decades later. That isn't going away anytime soon. We're beginning to learn how things like endocrine disruptors are affecting our unborn children, crossing the placenta during the first trimester. We have no idea yet what we're doing to them, those epigenetic effects that we're passing on to our descendants from things like flame retardants and solvents and plastics and such. But I think we have a tremendous opportunity to change. Through machine intelligence, machine economics, and machine ethics, we can perform new functions. We can enable the detection of externalities, the accounting for them, who did what and when and how much, and also to begin to automate the redress of these externalities as well, in a process I'm calling automated externality accounting. About 15 years ago, over at the Environmental Defense Fund, some folks put a soot sensor in a backpack, and they walked around the borough of New York collecting data. And they discovered that about 90% of all of those emissions of soot, which are incredibly bad for human health, 90% of them were coming from 1% of dwellings. 1% of people were making 90% of that mess. And because they were able to detect who was doing what, in just a few short years, the breathing situation in New York changed massively. In recent years, they've put similar sensors on Google Street View cars. And these Google Street View cars that come through your neighborhood twice a year or so are now detecting what is in the air, what's in our environment. And they detected that one industry making fertilizer was emitting 3 times more methane in the US than all other industry combined. And we had no idea that this was happening. But now we do. We can combine information from many different sensors and triangulate who is doing what and to who. We can even wear little sensors on our bodies and detect what is our exposome, what kind of stuff are we ourselves exposed to, and to begin to track where that's coming from. So that's detection. Accounting is perhaps simpler than we might imagine as well. Our credit card systems, which we think of as just a way to port money, in fact have many different aspects to them. There's all kinds of engines of trust building and dispute resolution built into those. And with every transaction, there's about 500 variables which are checked, and about 1/5 of those are purely for fraud. So we can apply these same mechanics to analyzing these kinds of effects between different actors in our economy. Enterprises run on amazing enterprise resource planning systems, which are kind of the nervous system of our economy. And organizations now are plugging into this kind of data to start to account for where in these different business processes externalities are created. And finally, things like do not pay and pactum are creating new ways of getting redress. They're speeding up the ability to sue somebody, or to take somebody to a small claims court, or to negotiate a right of access to something, to negotiate the ability to press an externality onto another person. I'd like to start a conversation at pacha.org, P-A-C-H-A, to figure out how we can create protocols that link these elements together in new ways. Because it is through doing this that I believe that we can actually meet our sustainable development goals in those 3 pillars, the economic, the environmental, and the social pillar, that financial, natural, and social capital, which is all so very precious. And I'll finish on this point as well. If we can better understand social capital and hedonic capital, right, happiness and suffering, then we have amazing new businesses that we can create as well. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've become very, very adept at fulfilling those bottom rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? But what about the upper ones? Love and belonging, self-esteem, etc.? Good luck, right? We have yet to industrialize those. And because of that, we try to fulfill those higher needs with the technologies that we use to fulfill the lower ones. But it doesn't work very well. That's not what makes human beings happy, is it? Nothing will make you happier than realizing that you have a shoulder to cry on with a good friend when times are tough. Nothing will make you more sad than recognizing that for whatever reason, a relationship that you once cherished is, for some reason, no more. Some animals are obligate carnivores. They have to eat meat. Human beings are obligately social beings. Moreover, we are obligately cooperative as well. The first industrial revolution was really about an augmentation of muscle, the muscle of human beings and beasts of burden. The informational revolution was about an augmentation of the mind, helping us to understand in new ways and shift information around. I believe we're coming to an augmentation of the human heart and soul, if you will. And it's going to come through the confluence of machine intelligence, machine economics, and machine ethics. The ability to understand all kinds of chaos, to align incentives in new ways, and put that spark of life and goodness into those systems. And it's going to create not a revolution, but a reformation, an interdependence reformation. That's what we can build as a species. Not to take from the world, but to safeguard the world and every species upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nell. Always fascinating. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to ask you one specific question that's also on here.
Yes.
It's about this business value of the human heart and soul.
Yes.
So could I translate that what you're saying is that the challenge for the people here in the room is to apply AI so that their companies can become the friends of their employees and the friends of their, truly in the word friend, right?
Yes.
Of their customers.
A friend is somebody that basically adds value to your life just by their presence, right? Mm-hmm. They are useful and it's fun to be with them. And that's truly what we can create, those kinds of positive sum interactions that uphold social capital and make people happy.
And that's the essence of AI to you.
That is indeed. And once we can start to really account and make sense of these effects, then there are tremendous business opportunities for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Nell.
Thank you so much, Michiel.